Since the time of the Union of Kruo in 1385, the Lithuanian and Polish kingdoms became closely linked through dynastic ties. According to this agreement, Władysław Jagiello first became both the King of Poland and the Grand Duke of Lithuania. For 2 centuries, the dynasty he founded almost continuously ruled both states. Still, these countries remained independent from one another. Each had its own parliament, laws, customs, treasury, and army. The only things that mostly united them were their common enemies and ruler. In the mid-16th century, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania faced serious challenges. The greatest threat came from the Principality of Moscow, whose rulers declared themselves the sole claimants to the lands of the former Kievan Rus. Most of the territories under Lithuanian rule were inhabited by Ruthenians, the ancestors of modern Ukrainians and Belarusians. Since the time of Ivan III, the Moscow princes and czars had sought to conquer these lands. Their advance was marked by the capture of Kursk, Chernihiv, Gomel, Bryansk, Smolensk, and Vyazma. The ambitious Moscow Tsar Ivan IV the Terrible aimed to capture Livonia and then continue his advance into the southeastern lands of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. In 1558, Moscow's forces attacked and defeated the Livonian Confederation. Soon after, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania decided to prevent the complete absorption of its Livonian allies and took action against the Moscow state. In 1561, the Treaty of Vilnius was concluded, according to which most of Livonia's lands were declared to be vassal-dependent on the Lithuanian ruler Sigismund II Augustus. Denmark and Sweden also intervened in the conflict, aiming to bring Livonia under their control. Moscow's troops captured Polotsk and the surrounding lands, but were defeated by the Lithuanian army in the Battle of the River Ula. Nonetheless, after the initial years of the Livonian War, it became clear that the Lithuanian army was significantly outnumbered by the Muscovites, and the principality's budget was considerably smaller than Ivan IV's. Additionally, the southern lands of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania frequently suffered from raids by Crimean and Nogai Tatars. As a result, Lithuanian officials sought assistance from the wealthier Poland. In addition, the Lithuanian Catholic and Protestant nobility were uncertain about their Orthodox Ruthenian fellow citizens, who made up more than 85% of the population. This even reflected in the full name of the state, which was sometimes referred to as the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, Rus, and Samogitia. The merger with the Kingdom of Poland would strengthen the position of Lithuanian Catholics. The idea of uniting the two states was supported by Sigismund II Augustus, who was both the Grand Duke of Lithuania and the King of Poland. Sigismund had no legitimate heirs to whom he could pass on his titles and possessions. Therefore, concerned about the fate of both states, he decided to unite them through a strong alliance. The lower tier of the nobility in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania also supported the union of the two states. They admired the rights and status of the minor and middle Polish nobility. At the time, Polish nobles had almost complete control over their country, enjoyed numerous privileges, and were formally equal to the great magnates. In contrast, in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, power was held by the higher echelons of the aristocracy. On the other hand, according to the Second Lithuanian Statute of 1566, the minor and middle nobility of the principality received new rights, including the ability to send their representatives to local sejmiks and to the General Sejm of Lithuania. Sigismund II took this step to mobilize the nobility, which made up the majority of his Lithuanian army in the face of the Moscow threat. The Polish nobility also wanted to unite with Lithuania. Even so, they believed that the union should occur through the absorption of Lithuanian lands and the distribution of those lands to Polish landowners. The Polish aristocracy announced their plans for the incorporation of Lithuanian territories into Poland at the joint Polish-Lithuanian Sejm in Warsaw. Extended negotiations between the nobility and state officials of both countries led to the convening of the Polish-Lithuanian Sejm in Lublin in January 1569. Sigismund II invited the nobility of both the Kingdom of Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania to discuss the terms of a new union. The Polish side proposed the union based on a project by the Krakow bishop Philip Pednewski. According to these terms, it was envisaged to create a single bicameral parliament, to elect and crown the king of the future state only in Poland, to form a joint treasury, and to gradually unify the legislation. The Lithuanian magnates reacted negatively to the idea of losing their aristocratic titles and being completely equalized in rights with the nobility. Therefore, in early March 1569, they, led by Mikołaj Radziwiłł, secretly left the assembly in protest. Meanwhile, the Polish side managed to gain the full support of the Ruthenian nobility from Ukrainian lands, who sought to obtain the same rights as the Polish nobility. Encouraged by this support, Sigismund II Augustus issued a decree on the incorporation of the Podlaski, Volhynia, Braclaw, and Kiev voivodeships into Poland. The union was to be established based on the Polish proposal. All Lithuanian aristocrats who did not agree with this decision and did not swear allegiance to the king were to lose their lands. Fearing for their property and status, the Lithuanian magnates returned to the Sejm. Regardless, their attempts to improve the terms of the union in their favor proved fruitless. In June and July 1569, the final agreement on the terms of the union was reached and approved by the Polish and Lithuanian Sejms, respectively. The terms of the union envisioned the creation of a new federative state, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The newly established country covered an area of nearly 880,000 square kilometers, making it one of the largest states in contemporary Europe. Formally, it was headed by a king, but the leading role was played by the joint bicameral parliament, the Sejm. The upper chamber of the parliament, the Senate, was composed of magnates, bishops, higher officials, and voivodes and castellans. The lower chamber, the House of Deputies, Izba Poselska, was made up of representatives elected from local noble provincial sejmiks. Only the Sejm could pass laws, approve taxes, consent to the declaration of war, and organize the mobilization of the nobility for military service. Additionally, without the consent of the Sejm, the king could not even choose a spouse for himself or his heir. This system of governance is sometimes referred to as noble democracy or noble republic, but in reality it was a noble oligarchy with a monarch at its head. Nevertheless, the king of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was, though dependent, still a politically influential figure. For a time, he managed foreign policy, appointed or approved state and local officials, administered royal lands, convened the Sejm, and presided over the Senate. According to the Union of Lublin, the territories of Podlaski, Volhynia, Kiev, and Braclaw voivodeships were assigned to Poland. On these lands, certain Polish laws were implemented, and some Polish nobility moved in and took up administrative positions. Notably, the population of these territories retained the right to practice their own religion, use the Ruthenian language, and apply local laws in their business and everyday lives. According to the Union of Lublin, the Polish crown and Lithuanian lands retained their own governments, separate budgets, distinct armies, and certain differences in local laws. Yet, a common monetary system was established, and the Polish-Lithuanian customs borders were removed. Additionally, Polish and Lithuanian nobility were allowed to freely purchase land in both parts of the United State. King Sigismund II ruled the united Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth for only a short time. He died in July 1572. The nobility and higher clergy were preoccupied with selecting a new king. The two most popular candidates were Henry of Valois, the younger brother of French King Charles IX, and Archduke Ernest Habsburg of Austria, the son of Emperor Maximilian II. At the elective Sejm in 1573, the nobility elected Henry of Valois as the new king. Henry's election was influenced by the international situation. At that time, the Habsburgs were engaged in fierce wars with the Ottomans, and the nobles of the Commonwealth did not want to face another formidable enemy on their southern borders. During the same gatherings, the Warsaw Confederation was also formed, and its representatives demanded the adoption of laws guaranteeing religious tolerance. Subsequently, the confirmation of the Warsaw Confederation's demands briefly made the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth one of the most tolerant European states of the era. To secure the title of King of the Commonwealth, Henry issued the so-called Henrician Articles. According to these, the election of each subsequent king was to depend solely on the nobility and take place after the death of the reigning monarch. In addition, the Sejm gained control over foreign policy. The king was required to cover the nobility's expenses for military campaigns, and the aristocracy was granted the right to legally rebel against the king, or to engage in a rokos. The traditional liberties and privileges previously granted to the nobility were preserved. Furthermore, a second agreement between the king and the nobility, known as the Pacta Conventa, was established. According to this agreement, Henry was also required to personally pay off the Commonwealth's debts, provide for a service of 4,000 Gascon mercenaries, organize and maintain a Polish fleet in the Baltic Sea at his own expense, and fund the education of 100 Polish students at the Sorbonne in Paris. At the beginning of 1574, Henry arrived in Poland, where he was crowned. Even so, the 22-year-old Henry felt uncomfortable in Poland, where he was constrained by numerous prohibitions, bored, and was expected to marry the 50-year-old Anna Jagiellon. In June 1574, the newly crowned king of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth learned of the death of Charles IX. Henry seized this opportunity and secretly fled from Poland to claim the vacant title of King of France. The nobility was enraged and sent diplomats to demand the return of Henry of Valois, but he refused to return to the Commonwealth. The nobility of the Commonwealth had to reconvene the electoral Sejm to choose a new king. This time, the main candidates were Emperor Maximilian II, supported by the magnates, and the ruler of Transylvania, Stephen Bathory, who had the backing of the middle nobility. Intense debates led to armed clashes between the supporters of both candidates, and there was a risk of civil war. Nevertheless, in the end, Stephen and his supporters triumphed, and in December 1575, Bathory was proclaimed king. The newly crowned leader proved to be a skilled commander. Under his leadership, the armies of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth inflicted significant defeats on the Principality of Moscow. Notably, it was the forces led by Bathory that captured Polotsk and Velikie Luki, and later laid siege to Pskov. These setbacks, combined with the threat of a Swedish invasion from the north and the Polish-Lithuanian army's advance on Chernihiv, compelled Ivan IV to make concessions and sign the Truce of Yam-Zapolski in 1582. According to the treaty, most of Livonia was ceded to the Commonwealth, while Polotsk and its surrounding lands remained under Stephen Bathory's control, and a small portion of the Gomel region was also transferred. Stephen Bathory attempted to curb the excesses of the nobility and magnates, notably ordering the execution of the notorious noble Samuel Zborowski. Additionally, the king increased the size of the regular army and expanded the registry of the Zaporozhian Cossacks, who played a role in defending the southern borders of the new state. Stephen's death in December 1586 once again brought the Commonwealth to the brink of civil war. Various noble and magnate factions supported different candidates and could not reach an agreement on the selection of a new king. The power and territorial extent of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth were also shaped by its military victories. The armies of this state were primarily composed of feudal noble militias, which were mobilized in times of war at the initiative of the king and the Sejm. Almost all nobles served in the cavalry, bringing their armed retainers into service as well. The most formidable units of the Commonwealth were the Winged Hussars, whose formations emerged in the mid-16th century. This cavalry attacked with powerful charges and stunned enemies with their bravery and speed. Additionally, there was a small, permanent professional infantry known as the quarter, kwarciane, maintained through the revenue from a quarter of the royal lands. The dominant social class in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was the nobility, which in these lands referred to the chivalric or aristocratic estate. Its numbers were estimated to be between 6% and 9% of the total population of the state. Nobles were personally free and enjoyed numerous legal privileges. For instance, in the case of committing a crime, a noble could only be judged by other aristocrats or the same. But noble justice was often ineffective, as offenders frequently avoided punishment due to the protection of powerful magnates. This led to the existence of forms of punishment such as banishment and infamy in the Commonwealth. Infamy was applied in cases of serious crimes and involved exile from the state, loss of noble honor, and all political rights. The murder of a person who had been declared infamous could be rewarded financially by the state. Noble feuds were a common occurrence among the aristocracy of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Moreover, under certain conditions, such conflicts were legally permitted. These belligerent noble conflicts undermined the state from within and caused significant damage, which contemporaries compared to the harm inflicted by Tatar invasions. Only the nobility and ecclesiastical hierarchs held all political rights, with the ability to be elected and to elect members to the parliament or local authorities. Most other official positions were reserved exclusively for nobles. There was even a whole ideology formed around the superiority of the nobility, later known as Sarmatism. According to this ideology, the nobles were considered descendants of the Sarmatians, the earliest knights of Europe, who had achieved their dominant status through bravery and a separation from the common people. The nobility held both legal and actual power over the peasants living on their lands. Peasants were required to obey all orders from their lords and perform corvée labor. Corvée labor was the forced and unpaid performance of certain tasks by peasants for their lords. Since 1518, peasants had lost the right to file complaints against the abuses of their feudal lords. The complete authority of the lords over the peasants opened numerous avenues for abuse, including arbitrary increases in corvée labor and instances of sexual or physical violence. The power and position of the noble aristocracy in the Commonwealth were also reflected in land ownership statistics. By the end of the 16th century, the nobility owned about 60% of all cultivated land. The church owned another 25%, and the state, represented by the king, owned approximately 15%. The process of serfdom for the majority of peasants in the Kingdom of Poland began in the 15th century and was completed in the first half of the 16th century. In the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, serfdom developed somewhat later and was regulated by the 3 Lithuanian statutes. Serfdom made it impossible for a peasant to legally leave their lord's domain, deprived them of freedom, and rendered their conditions similar to that of slavery. With the incorporation of the Volhynian, Kiev, and Braclaw voivodeships into Poland, feudal serfdom practices were gradually introduced there as well. Although most local peasants still found themselves in a better situation compared to their counterparts in the Ruthenian or Sandomier's voivodeships. Peasants made up about 73% of the population of the Commonwealth and were in a rather difficult situation. This was primarily due to the strengthening of the aristocracy's position, which increased its power over the peasants. Additionally, Europe was rocked by the price revolution, which caused the cost of goods and products to rise rapidly. If the aristocrats wanted more new and exclusive goods, they needed to increase the sale of agricultural products from their estates. To achieve this, the nobles seized free and peasant lands and increased the amount of corvée labor. The most profitable trade for the nobles was the export of rye and wheat. During the 16th century, the volume of grain exported from the Commonwealth to other European countries through Gdansk increased nearly tenfold. During this period, corvée labor in Lesser Poland increased from 1 to 3 to 4 days per week. Meanwhile, the real income of peasants and craftsmen decreased by almost 3 times. By the end of the 16th century, the average profits for the nobility from 1 hectare of land were 19 times higher than those of the peasants, primarily due to the use of the latter's free labor. In addition to the fixed corvée, or its monetary equivalent, the zins, there were other forms of feudal exploitation. Specifically, peasants were required to perform unpaid labor for the repair of noble houses, castles, and roads, and to pay various feudal dues. Moreover, the nobility held numerous economic monopolies. For example, peasants were obliged to grind their grain only at noble mills or purchase alcohol exclusively from noble taverns. Additionally, goods sold or bought by the nobility were exempt from tariffs. Furthermore, the nobility was allowed to store their goods in city warehouses free of charge. The Commonwealth of Poland-Lithuania was one of the most urbanized states in Central Eastern Europe. In its multinational cities lived about 20% of the population, and these cities were important trade and manufacturing centers. At the same time, their development was hindered by noble privileges and restrictions on peasant migration to urban areas. A significant portion of the cities in the Commonwealth had self-government, though it was somewhat limited. The most common model for the self-governing cities was the so-called Magdeburg Law. Yet, unlike many Western European countries, the cities of the newly formed state did not have their own representation in the parliament and did not play a significant role in the political life of the state. In the cities of the Commonwealth, science and printing flourished, and educational institutions were established. An isolated group within the population, separate from the aristocracy, clergy, and peasants, were the Jews, about 8% of the population. They were attracted by the country's religious tolerance and the presence of self-governance within Jewish communities. They controlled a significant portion of both domestic and foreign trade, as well as money lending. The formation of the Commonwealth of Poland-Lithuania was a continuation of the dynastic union between the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and the Kingdom of Poland. The united federative state had a single king and a common parliament, in which the nobility held dominant power. This system of governance even earned the name noble democracy. The privileged position of the belligerent nobility, in the absence of a strong central authority, often led to feudal wars and internal conflicts. At the dawn of its existence, the Commonwealth was one of the most religiously tolerant states in Europe, with dynamic development in science and literature. But the lack of effective central authority, increasing feudal exploitation of the population, and territorial disputes with neighbors posed significant threats to the state's further development.